Hey, everybody. In what may potentially be a bit of an unexpected thing, whilst both of us work on a video relating to Ryan Johnson's previous movie, we've both recently been to the theaters to see his most recent Knives Out, and we just decided impromptu that it was worth talking about. And so here we are. And I don't think it's going to be too much of a giveaway to just say that we both really enjoyed this movie. This discussion is going to be very positive. It's been mostly positive word from the critics. And yeah, I don't know anyone personally who's seen this movie and disliked it. But yeah, I thought it was a great time. It was really cool, and we're just gonna gush about it for who knows how long right now. That said, you mentioned like right before we start seeing the trailer and being immediately sold on it thanks to the cast. And I don't know if that's where you want to start, just praising the performances.
Yeah, we can get into the performances. This is a stellar cast, absolutely stellar cast. You got Chris Evans, Captain America, obviously my favorite. And another really getting to see him play a role distinctly the opposite of that.
Yeah, I almost gotta wonder if it's like coming home for him, where we used to cast him just always as the arrogant douchebag, to the point that when he was cast as Captain America, everyone was like, "Really? That's weird casting choice." Now he's been in that role so long, almost a full decade, and you gotta wonder, was he like, "Hey Ryan, I see you've got this character who's a total douche with like zero redeeming qualities. Can I play him?"
Yeah, it was great to see him. We got Anna De Amirez.
And
I'm
it's
probably
Anna,
pronouncing this.
it's Ana de Armas.
Anna De Armas. Yeah, I love her. She was in I think like the first thing I ever saw her in was Blade Runner 2049, and she's amazing.
Hmm. Yeah, and like the big sort of spoiler, quote unquote spoiler, just for the casting, where I was like, on my Facebook post, I was like, don't even look up the order of the cast for this movie, and that's because I didn't even want anyone to go into the movie knowing that she is the main character, and
Yeah,
like,
this is essentially her movie.
yeah, and
Like,
that's
it's
not.
not as much of an ensemble cast film as you would think. It is essentially her film.
Yeah, and like because obviously it's a mystery, you would expect that the protagonist would be the detective, and here he's played by Daniel Craig, and he's great, and he's
Oh, he's
basically.
eating it up. He's chewing up the scenery in this movie.
And Ryan Johnson has already mentioned that he would love to do like a movie every couple of years with this character, and just like him and Daniel Craig, just like chewing the scenery. It would be great. But yeah, he's basically the secondary protagonist. But I wasn't sure who would be like the lead, if anyone, going into this, because you're right. With this setup, it could so easily just be a completely equal ensemble, like Clue, where there's
Or
not.
something like Hateful Eight.
Yeah, where even Hateful Eight, I would say by the end of that movie, you can say, okay, such and such person is a main character or the lead, but with this movie, it's not clear until, I want to say, until we find out what the actual, like, okay, so for people, because we're not getting into like full spoilers yet, for people who haven't seen the movie, it's obviously a murder mystery. This family, the Thrombies, is mourning the death of their dad, and there's some mysterious circumstance that has brought Daniel Craig as the investigator there to figure out exactly what happened and whether or not this was really a suicide, as everyone believes. And Anna de Armas' character Marta is like the his nurse, and she's like an honorary member of the family. And it doesn't really become clear that she is even basically the movie's lead until we find out what actually happened and how he actually died. And I want to say that's a good 20-25 minutes in.
I don't know if that early, but we can find out very soon that she's both.
Sorry, you cut out for a sec. What'd you say?
Actually, yeah, I don't know if it's that soon, but we do um,
Yeah. Like it is a little we spend a little bit of the movie not knowing who the lead is. And like I was suspecting that if it wasn't Daniel Craig, it would be Jamie Lee Curtis, who's also great. She's basically like the matriarch of the family after Harlan, the murder victim, has been off. She's kind of the family leader, and she plays that role great. And just I don't even know where to start. Really, it's a really good mystery. I know
Well,
a
we
couple.
can finish going through the rest of the cast.
Okay, yeah, we might as well because there's Jamie Lee Curtis, who's great. Michael Shannon is great.
Catherine Langford, who I know from 13 Reasons Why. Um, say what you will about that show, but she's great in it.
Mm-hmm. What? Don Johnson? It's Don Johnson, right?
Don Johnson.
And just Don Johnson. Who played Joni? Why am I forgetting her
Oh,
name?
Don Johnson. He plays Morris Bristow or Bristow.
Yeah, he's married to Jamie Lee Curtis,
Yeah,
and they're just I want to say they have a fun dynamic, but like every character has a fun dynamic in this one, and they're all like none of them feel like cartoons, except for debatably Daniel Craig, just because of like how thick the accent is, and obviously he's playing a very eccentric, like detective type.
yeah. He's a very much like larger than life, almost like a cartoon character compared to
Mm.
everyone else.
But aside from him, everyone is pretty down to earth. I will say Catherine Langford, I think, is pretty good for what she's given. The younger members of the family, her and Jaden
The guy from
Martell,
the guy from the It movies, the new It film.
yeah, they don't get too much to do.
Yeah, those are the two roles that could really be anyone.
Yeah,
I don't even remember him having more than like 5, maybe 6 lines.
yeah, and like that's part of the archetype that he's playing, where like he's the little sort of misanthropic creep who doesn't say much. But yeah, he's there. It feels like mostly for plot purposes and like thematic reasons.
We don't get Chris Evans, who plays Ransom, for a fair amount of the movie, and I was wondering, like, well, where is he? When are we finally going to see Ransom?
Yeah, and I'll say on that note, like tying into what I was going to bring up earlier, just like the mystery itself, I think it's a really well done mystery. You can make some like arguments. I guess you can debate, but you can always do that with mysteries like this. Like, how much are they cheating? How much maybe are characters picking up on things that we, the audience, don't necessarily have the chance to pick up on, or whatever. I personally think it's really effective. And there are a couple of people, even people who like the movie. I've heard the occasional complaint that they were able to call a lot of it. And I don't know if I'm just bad at calling mysteries because I had the same thing with Detective Pikachu, where it's like when the twists did happen, I, for the most part, didn't see them coming.
I will admit to not seeing the twist with Ransom coming. Not going to say exactly what that is because we're not in spoiler territory yet. But there's a scene where both Ransom and Marta are in a diner, and it plays like he seems so genuine, and
Yeah.
then you feel, and then later on you get the turn, and you're like, oh, completely blindsided.
Yeah, and it's like the thing is, if there's anything that I think could make it easier to tell like what's going on with him, it is what you mentioned of just how late into the movie he shows up, because he's all over the ads. He's very clearly like he is a selling point for a lot of people if the rest of the cast wasn't enough. And like his character gets a lot of showcase and trailers and stuff. And yeah, you do spend a lot of the movie going like, okay, well he's showing up in flashbacks and everyone's mentioning him, but he's not really showing up until I want to say around the end of Act 1 where he just kind of pops in. It's like, "Oh wow, I almost forgot you were in this movie. You've been gone the whole time."
we just keep seeing him like pick up a jacket and storm out of the house in flashbacks.
Mm-hmm. And like, I will say also, like, you get a part of this is obviously being informed by the trailers, and just that one whole bit where he's like telling everybody to screw off, and they're all yelling at him. But even that aside, like, you get a decent sense of who this guy is just based on how people talk about him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's like obviously like.
But that's the thing is, like people say that, but everyone has their own perceptions of people, And so when we get to that scene with Marta and him in the diner, and how he's coming across so genuine and like kind of a good person who actually, is kind of caring, or at least can be caring, I buy it.
Yeah.
And still blindsided by the switch later.
And it really, and like this isn't like a spoiler because like they're an upper class rich family, you kind of see it coming. But as things sort of unravel, and as the title suggests, like the knives come out, metaphorically speaking, and it turns out that really no one in this family is as good of a person as you'd maybe like them to be. That's around the time that he comes in and is like, okay, so he is kind of an arrogant douchebag, but everyone here very quickly kind of turns, and you kind of want.
Yeah, like you come to the realization that none of them are really good people.
Yeah, and so you want, like, your instinct is to assume then that the subversion then goes all the way. So like they come off as nice and really they're bad people, and he comes off like a really he's a good person. And you're going to have to bleep that out because that was an accident. I apologize. But yeah. But then, yeah, so I don't know. Do you want to just go into straight up spoilers? Because, again, like, we find out fairly early into the movie, like, how Harlan actually dies and what the actual circumstances are. And it's a little difficult to talk about the rest without at least addressing that. So we might as well get into full-on spoilers. If you haven't seen the movie, go see it. It's good.
It is very good. I highly recommend going to see it. It is my favorite film from Rian Johnson yet. Ooh. I really like Looper. Looper's a close second. And I have my grievances with Last Jedi. I don't hate that movie. And like there are certainly segments of it that are enjoyable, but I can't bring myself to even necessarily call it a good movie.
See, I'm on the complete opposite end of the spectrum. Last Jedi is like one of my favorite movies of the decade, possibly. I still prefer it to this movie, but that is a high bar, so that's not even remotely a mark against this movie, and who knows, that might change as I see it again and again, because obviously with movies like this where there's a bunch of moving parts, like repeat viewings are going to enhance it. But like that's why I say it's a close second for me right now.
All right, so spoilers.
Right, so like a little ways into the movie, like after we've gotten the setup of, we get the sense of like everybody's perspective on the night that he died, and it was like it was his birthday party. Everyone was in the house. Everyone has slightly different takes on what the vibe of that night was, and everyone is sort of presented with a potential motive to possibly murder him. And then we find out it was a complete accident because he's with Marta upstairs, and they're like hanging out and they're playing a game of Go, which they like to play. He like does stuff that knocks things over, and she has to treat him with some meds and also just give him a little bit of morphine just for fun. And then it turns out she switched the things by accident because everything was knocked over and fell down. So he's got a couple minutes to live, and he's like, all right, I've gamed out this elaborate like way to make sure that you don't get spotted, because he's a mystery writer himself, and so he knows how to plan these things out. And he just straight up kills himself so that clearly it looks like what it is, which is that he committed suicide and she's got an alibi and she's off scot-free. And once we, the audience, learn that, and what I really like is we get all that information, and in universe it's like a split second of just her remembering before she actually gives her version of events. But
Which is the coin flip. That was a great device.
Yeah, the coin flip was great. But yeah, once that happens is when the movie kind of shifts and we realize, oh, she's the main character, and like the tension is not solving the mystery of who killed Harlan. We know how that happened. The tension is how can she like make it?
How's she going to maintain it? How's she going to get out of this with Detective digging and digging and digging into every...
Yeah. And like it's a really tough situation because he appoints her basically as his Watson. And so she's got to take part in the investigation.
And she has this hilarious condition where she vomits if she lies.
Yeah, and like I have no clue if that's has any basis in like real life medical conditions or whatever, but it's a fun
I wouldn't be surprised if like Joker's laugh and Joker, the one with Joaquin Phoenix, that's a real condition. So yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if like throwing up at the thought of lying or actually lying is an actual condition.
Yeah. And it's like it's a fun gag, and it's also a really good device for tension where it's like this, because the thing that this movie ultimately comes down on is that she is the one decent person, really, because again, the whole family is kind of corrupt, and even the best of them have their issues and are very kind of like selfish people, whereas she, both just by nature and by necessity, has to be like the best of them. And so she can't tell any lies, despite the fact that everyone else around her is constantly lying. And like she's the one that we want to get out of the situation, okay, but she has this constant obstacle to like make things harder for herself.
And I love that she comes out on top because of the fact that she's a nice person. Mm-hmm. Like if she didn't stay to help that woman who was dying, who was dying of drugs, the whole situation would have unraveled.
And like she gets in the situation that she's in to begin with by being a good person, where it's like you get the sense that this is a family that kind of tolerates each other, but the whole reason that she's there is not just to be a nurse, but because Harlan needs a friend. And so that tells you all that you need to know about like he's got like such a huge family and he can't really connect with any of them. And so he leaves all of his remains and all of his property to her, like everything, all the money, the house, everything goes to her. And that's when everyone sort of turns on her. And I really like that scene.
And their true color show.
Yeah. I like the soundtrack for that scene. I like the camera work, just how progressively like it's really off-putting and like it's entertaining, but in like kind of a creepy way where it's like, oh man, that took a turn for the worst real fast, and now she genuinely does not feel safe. And yeah, again, that's around when Ransom shows up, and he sort of becomes the safety net or like the life vest in that situation. But then, as it turns out, that's all part of his gambit.
Yeah, that reveal that he came in and switched the drugs was crazy. And even more crazy was the fact that she switched them back. So
yeah,
like she didn't even actually give him the fatal dose of the drugs. He was fine, but they didn't know that.
Yeah, and it's like it is. It's part of the issue, which is like something interesting that we do is that Ransom, for the fact that he ultimately ends up being the antagonist versus Harlan, who, based on what we have to go on, is like the one actual member of the family who's a decent person. He mentions that he sees so much of himself in Ransom, and like you see it because both of them just overcomplicate things unnecessarily. Where like Ransom made this whole plot, and also Harlan devised this whole thing of like making sure that Marta would be safe and have an alibi. And clearly, those are coming from two opposite places. Like, one is totally selfish, and one is just looking out for his friend. But at the same time, if he just like waited for a second and let her call the hospital, then he would still be alive.
That's true, but as she said, if she actually gave him the drug that they thought was given to him, he would have been dead before the ambulance even got there.
Yeah, it's a really unfortunate situation, but it's kind of it's I don't know, it's not necessarily like a thing inherent to the mystery genre, but it's just such a funny but also tragic thing of like, oh man, there's any number of ways this could have been avoided, even with the antagonist doing their thing, and it sucks that it didn't get to play out like that.
And I want to say this about the whole mystery thing. And I've seen this criticism not only thrown at this movie, but a lot of movies in the genre where it's like, if I can call it, it's a bad movie. I'm not one of those people who is like overly analytical. Well, obviously, we critique movies and stuff, but I'm not thinking 10 steps ahead and like trying to nitpick at the cracks and everything. I'm just going along for the ride. I'm not trying to unravel the mystery before it's unraveled. You know what I mean? I just I watched the movie, experienced the movie, and I think more than the actual mystery of who killed him, because we find out fairly early on that he actually did kill himself. It's more about the journey and the circumstances around why he did that.
Yeah. And like we said, with the setup of each individual member of the family going over that night and like the different reasons that they each have for why they might have possibly wanted to kill him if that were to have happened. It's really all about like examining sort of like the situation that they're all in financially, socially, and the mystery is just kind of the fun sort of genre skeleton to hang all that stuff on. Because and I mentioned earlier the younger one, the Nazi child, as Benoit Blanc calls him. Like he's really there for thematic purposes because this is a very 2019 movie, and that there's already a whole like vocal minority of people going like, you only like this movie because it's SJW propaganda and it's anti-conservative and etc. 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 When it's like, that's annoying, but more than most movies, you understand where it's coming from with this one because this is not remotely subtle about like its critiques of right-wing politics, its critiques of the obvious fact that we are in this setting of like a very wealthy, bourgeois, largely right-leaning, it seems, mostly composed of older people, white family, and our protagonist is this kind of put upon virtuous Mexican
immigrant.
Yeah, daughter of an immigrant and like that plays into part of like the tension with her is that her mom is undocumented, and that becomes like a thing that they try to use against her. There's like all of their interactions with her, even like I said earlier, the more positive ones are coded with a lot of.
I know what you're talking about. There's a scene early on in the movie with Morris when he's talking about how if immigrants come here illegally, they should be punished, this and that, and then he calls her into the room, and it's really uncomfortable and kind of tone deaf, and
like she's already like within like earshot as they're having that conversation, and then he prompts her in to like use her as an example. And that's the most overt example of it, definitely, but like all over the movie, it's like the fact her race and her relationship with the family as like of lower cultural socioeconomic status is informing like the whole movie.
And I think that only serves to strengthen the narrative
Mm-hmm.
because while they all, at least in some way, are obviously looking down on her because of that, the one person um, who sees her as she should be seen, the like overall patriarch of the family who dies, he
Mm-hmm.
leaves all his stuff to her because she's she treats him like a person. Like it's not just a servant thing. Like they are genuine friends.
Yeah, and it's like it kind of creates this interesting thing where, like you say, it's not just that she is on the lower end of the spectrum in terms of like her status compared to them. It's also that he is on top, and him being on top and her being on the bottom, both of them kind of get objectified because of that. Where he is literally the patriarch of the family, and they continuously say that she's like a member of the family, and yet they keep kind of like looking at them as not that. Where the issue is that, like, is it Richard? No, it's the one that you said. Morris? No,
Yeah,
Walt. Walt is the one played by Michael Shannon who owns the who basically has control over.
he publishes the books
Yeah,
for
he
his dad.
manages the publishing company, and he wants to do certain things, and he wants to exercise some power. And Harlan is like, "Okay, this was a mistake. You should be able to do what you want to do with your own properties and not mine. So I'm gonna relieve you of duty," and that's his potential motivation for the murder. Hugh is just like, "What? No, you can't cut me out of the money like everyone, but really, I'm more concerned about me." Joni, played by Toni Collette, is also concerned about money because she and Catherine Langford's character Meg need it, even though they kind of they were brought into the family. It's like it's a whole bunch of whether it's they want the money or they want reputation or they want status. They all want things from him that stop them from fully seeing him as like a person. And it's the same thing with her. And the two of them only really have each other, which is why they're the best people in the movie, really.
That is true.
And like it becomes even more of a thing where again, this is something that we were mentioning while we were talking about Last Jedi before we started this. Ryan Johnson is really good at getting you into a character's headspace to the point that you don't even really realize when they're doing or saying something that's maybe less reasonable or more reasonable than you initially assume. And part of that is a character that we haven't even mentioned, which is the great grandmother, Harlan's mom, played by Kay Callan, who is sort of like a comedic prop for most of the movie, and that's how the other characters treat her. And it's only Blanc who goes up to her and is like, "Oh yeah, your son just died, and like you seem totally out of it and senile, but I'd like to give you some condolences and treat you like a person anyway because clearly nobody else has." And that's a moment of like, "Oh man, the audience, didn't even realize that. Now I feel bad."
Yeah, that's pretty crazy when you think about it.
And like it turns out that she's paying more attention than anybody realizes. And like the great how great was it when when things look like they're mostly resolved, and then Blunt goes away with Marta, and it just cuts to her, and she's like, "Heh."
That was hysterical. That was one of the biggest laughs of the whole movie.
Yeah. And like again, there's all just it's so great because the best thing about mysteries is all the little things that then pay off, even if it's not like, ooh, this thing, motivation or methodology for the murder itself. But when it's
Or great stuff that's like set up, you don't even know it's a setup until you get to the payoff. Like the thing with some of the knives being
yes,
faked.
I was gonna say that. That was my favorite thing. And it's like it did not occur to me until after they were on the floor. I was like, oh no, he stabbed her. And then it's like,
It's a
nope.
fake knife.
Yeah, it's like 2 seconds before Ransom realizes that. I'm like, wait a minute, that line about the fake knives, it's fake. It's that was great. And again, like the setup, and we mentioned the thing that Marta has where she can't lie without throwing up. And the great thing about that is that the more, because with her being in the protagonist spot, she also has to be like an intelligent character, and we have to see her like being clever and exercising some like improvisational skills and being able to put things together. And
There are great scenes where she obviously can't lie, but she just omits certain truths and
yeah,
just tells certain slivers of the truth just enough to keep the detective from drilling her more.
hmm and like in the end, like right before like the thing that prompts Ransom to stab her is like she's able to hold on to herself just long enough to like lie about Fran being alive so that he'll basically fess up to having murdered her. And it's like, nope, she was dead, tricked you. And it's like, that's great because she's able to use something, because all of the characters in the room, like us, the audience, are assuming that she can't lie. And so she's able to use what was once an obstacle to her advantage. And it's a really clever like thing that's like one last, oh, that's so smart. This character is really cool.
Yeah, that was great.
Mm.
That there's like, and I want to say there's like a good. There are so many twists and turns like that in this movie. Um, but you know they all feel they're all satisfying and they're all like really well executed.
Yeah. Like again, nothing feels forced. And I knew some people who really dislike The Last Jedi for plot reasons were worried about the prospect of Ryan Johnson even doing a mystery because they're under the impression that he just can't like do decent setup and payoff. And like I don't understand that, but if you're worried about that, then I don't think this movie I think this movie will lay those worries to rest personally.
That this was I feel like that was well maybe not his mission statement because um, I'm sure he's confident in himself as a director, but like this movie was like, yep, I got it, I know I'm doing.
You're dropping the gauntlet.
Yeah,
And yeah,
just
like
drop the mic.
oh
Like the
sorry,
end of this movie felt like a mic drop.
it did. Especially in like
When she's just standing at the top of the house, just staring at all of them.
yes, I was gonna say like between this movie and The Last Jedi, I think I want to give Ryan Johnson like the award for ending his movies with the perfect shot where with all the socio-political themes and all this character has been through personally and just the degree to which we've seen the entire rest of the cast basically just be all about the money and the status and the socio-political stuff, and seeing her standing above all of them, and she has the mug that's like my house, my rules, my coffee, and that's where we end. It's like it's perfect, 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 perfect. It's just like the kid with the broom in The Last Jedi, and he holds it up, and it looks like a lightsaber. I'm like, perfect shot to close out the themes and like the central narrative arc of this movie.
Yeah, I think that just about covers it.
And like the thing is, I don't want to because obviously this movie being not a franchise thing, an original movie, and like it's doing well in the box office, and I'm really glad to see that. But it almost feels kind of like a disservice to this movie to keep bringing up The Last Jedi just because that's such a high profile thing, and the reaction to that movie sticks to Rian Johnson's name to this day. But I don't, let me know if you have this. I don't think this movie gets made the way it is with the themes that it's about without The Last Jedi happening and the very, very politically charged reaction to that movie from some people.
Um, I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. Um, Especially because like that movie, I'm not sensing anything inherently political, like complaint wise with that movie aside from Rose, and that is just more tone deaf, kind of ignorant, racist stuff that I've seen on
Yeah,
Hollywood.
that's exactly what I'm talking about, though. And like the thing is that unfortunately is way more prevalent than it has any right to be. And like you mentioned, not liking Rose as a character earlier, and like I totally get that. And like I
And
understand.
here's the thing, she's fine for most of the movie. She's fine for like 60, maybe 70% of it, and then we get to like the latter part of them being on Canto Bight or whatever that casino planet is.
Yep, that's it.
Okay, yeah, and she hates the rich folk. I'm like, okay, that's great. Can we get on with the story? Um,
Okay, we can talk about that when we turn off the live thing because I don't want to make this into suddenly a review of that movie, and
okay.
I'm sure that we both have a lot to say about that. But the only reason I bring it up is, and like I'm sure that Rian Johnson would have eventually made this movie anyway. But I think just the way that it is now and it being about the things it's about and like having Marta be the central protagonist and the socio-political themes and stuff, I feel like so much of that is informed by the stuff that people sort of like said toward Kelly Marie Tran and like the fact that like whether or not it's a majority of people or how justified you want to say specific complaints are, I think there was a lot of very politically loaded, racially loaded stuff going on to the reaction to specifically those kind of things in The Last Jedi. And I think I don't know, a lot of this movie, like with the younger kid whose name I keep forgetting, the Jade Martell's character, a lot of that feels like just him getting out a lot of frustration about having to be at the center of that kind of discourse for going on 2 years now. And like so much of that is attached to like just overt racism and classism and stuff. And I think it's really informing this movie.
That's so weird to me because it's isolated to only one character in that whole movie. Like it's just Rose.
Right? But that character, like, we'll talk about it, but like, Rose is not just like an incidental character. Like, she is basically the moral compass of an entire subplot, if not a lot of the movie. We'll get into that. This is not a Last Jedi review video, dang it. But well, yeah, we are eager to continue that conversation. So we're just gonna do that. Whereas we're gonna end this video saying this movie is great on its own terms, even if you don't like The Last Jedi, even if you've got like personal distaste for Rian Johnson, which I think is weird to have a thing over movies, but whatever, you should give this one a shot. It's really, really good. I don't think you'll regret it. It's a good time. Go see it.
Definitely. It is I think it might be the best original movie I've seen all year.
I'm torn because Jojo Rabbit and Parasite are still like on my mind. It's like just great, great, great stuff. Although I don't know if Jojo Rabbit counts because that's based on a book technically, but whatever. It's up there. It is a contender.
And I didn't see either of those movies, so that's not really even a fair statement.
Oh yeah, that's true. You should see both of those movies. But anyway, we're gonna sign off there, and we're just gonna keep talking about The Last Jedi. I apologize. So thank you for listening, and goodbye.